Okay, I think it's about 3 o'clock, or 4 o'clock rather, more or less, 4 o'clock Central Time here. I'm Ted Morrissey. I'm Grant's publisher, among other things. So I'll be doing a brief introduction here, and then we'll let Grant do his thing. I do want to remind everyone, if you would mute your microphones while the reading is going on. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So obviously at that time, that would, if you want to unmute, that would be great. Also, if you want to ask questions, but you don't necessarily want to jump on at the end, if you want to use the chat function in Zoom here, you can send me a question, and I'll be happy to read those to Grant at the end of his reading. All right. But as I mentioned, I'm Ted Morrissey, and I've been publishing Grant Tracey since 2015. That number always stands out in my head because it was during the North American Review Bicentennial Conference. And I went there to the conference in Cedar Falls. Obviously, I wanted to attend the conference, but I'd also asked Jeremy Schraffenberger, who has joined us here, if he could arrange a meeting between me and Grant, because I had the malicious intent of stealing Grant away from his current publisher. And I'm happy to report that that worked out just great. So actually, the first book of Grant's that we published was Final Stanzas, which is a collection of short stories. And as I was kind of sitting here waiting to unmute myself, I realized that a couple of the blurbs on the back of Final Stanzas certainly apply to Grant's writing overall. So even though they were given to us specifically for this collection, let me kind of read those real quickly here. The first comes from Stephen Schwartz, well-known author, obviously, among other things, of Little Raw Souls. And he writes of Grant, with the compelling force of cinema, Grant's writing pulls us across geographical and emotional borders into the deepest recesses of the heart. It is a fine and moving kind of writing. Certainly true. Also, Susan Jackson Rogers, author of Ex-Boyfriend on Aisle 6. She said this of Grant's writing: Tracey's knowledge of music, film, theater, TV shows, plays, and literature infuses his writing at every turn, much to the reader's delight. And again, I think those are very true of all of Grant's writing, including what we're all gathered here to listen to for the next hour or so, and that is his newest Hayden Fuller book, 5 Hard Bites. While we were working on Final Stanzas, Grant, the dyed-in-the-wool short story author, let me know that he had returned to his first love, and he was writing detective fiction. And I was, of course, pretty curious about that, so I asked him to send me that first manuscript, which was Cheap Amusements, and he did, and the rest, as we say, is history. So this collection, 5 Hard Bites, is interesting. I'll let Grant say as much as he wants to about it, but just a little bit. It's actually a collection of 3 complete novels, a novella, and a Hayden Fuller short story. And even though they are standalone, self-contained pieces, they also work really nicely together as a single narrative. In fact, on the back of the book, a clever person has written, 5 Hard Bites is a collection with the narrative arc of a single novel, an epic detective adventure, as if Homer's Odysseus were wearing gumshoe sandals and a sea-battered pork pie hat. So indeed, it can be enjoyed kind of one piece at a time or as an overall narrative. With that, let me read just a kind of a formal introduction of Grant, then I'll let him do his thing. Again, there'll be a quick Q&A at the end, and if you want to write a question in the chat, I'll be happy to relay that to Grant. But this is from his author's note in the book. It says, in 2015, Grant Tracey turned to writing crime noir. Before that, he had published nearly 50 short stories in small literary magazines and story collections. The sensibilities of 5 Hard Bites are in part indebted to the writings of Raymond Chandler, Samuel Fuller, Mickey Spillane, and Jim Thompson. Grant teaches creative writing and film at the University of Northern Iowa and edits the North American Review. In 2013, he received an Iowa Regents Award for Faculty Excellence. In 2021, he was a recipient of UNI's Graduate College Distinguished Scholar Award. Recent publications include Winsome Bend of the Sun, a chapbook, The Key Witness, a short story in Tough, and 4 on the floor, a forthcoming Hayden Fuller Mystery appearing in Groovy Gumshoes. So with that, let me turn the mic over to Grant Tracey.
Hey, all right. Well, thanks, Ted, and thanks everyone for zooming in. I'm going to read for about 35 minutes, and I timed myself yesterday. That's how long it took. So hopefully I read at the same pace. And I just want to say real quickly, the Big Heat is probably my favorite film noir film and one of my favorite detective books. And I think it's just a perfectly crafted film. And one of the things I love about The Big Heat is the sort of cycle of crime and the ambiguity that's in it. And so I think this story in microcosm kind of can represent the entire collection. There's themes in here that are in all the other stories across the whole collection if you see it as a novel. So things like sexual abuse, exploitation, government conspiracies, witnesses lying, all that kind of stuff. At the end of The Big Heat, there's Dave Banyan goes on a Pyrrhic journey. He dies a little in solving the case, and I just love that idea. And at the end, there's a phone call and there's a hit and run. So the cycle of crime continues. And I think the last line is Banyan saying, "Keep the coffee hot, Hugo." So hopefully you all got some hot coffee and let's rock and roll. Shot, reverse shot. 1. A weird-looking fella leaned with the sway of the door. His eyes were covered by a makeshift mask constructed from the inside reflectors of a car's headlights. I could barely see the person peeking behind long metal cones the shape of construction zone pylons. I was here to find the girl. Mordecai Zuger. We shook hands. His was clammy. Fuller. Hayden Fuller. I know who you are. Play with Belleville tonight. I nodded. I was a grinder, back in the NHL at long last after a 2-year forced retirement. Anyway, Rajan Boudou, my teammate and our flashy high-scoring winger, called me, mumbling something or other about 1,000 oysters and his girl being out of control. Could I come and get her? She was making a scene, dig? So here I was at this party at Place Jacques Cartier in a converted warehouse at 2:30 in the goddamn morning. I didn't drink, so the fellas count on me to be their designated driver. Never mind that I had a post-game headache that 2 Anderson had done nothing to take care of. Zuger ushered me in, smelling of gasoline. His clothing was of a limited costume budget variety. He was naked. You must be here to get our Lucy. He introduced me to the fella standing behind him, sporting a gas station attendant shirt and nothing else. My makeup guy in DP, Mark Harris, makes all those hockey cuts and stitches look real, he said. Zuger was filming his first ever mainstream film, Fire Wagon Hockey. Harris, a big guy with wide set eyes and a flat top, went on and on about Lon Chaney and his use of makeup, something about fishing wire and putty. I feigned interest. A haze of pot drifted from the ceiling like low-slung hammocks. Pale white bodies shimmied to thin jazz. Dots of pink powder and ashtrays of crushed cigarettes ran across a low-end coffee table. Mark drifted to the dust. Pink cocaine, that's a new one. Cocaine, Zuger laughed. Cocaine, no, that's the latest in uppers. Another laugh, an inside joke, I gathered. He pointed upstairs. Lucy. Naked men with saggy chests and partial erections gathered around, placing specks of powder under their tongues. Young women jostled about like crashing whitecaps. Suddenly, a woman with a blonde beehive, heavy lipstick, and a red dress lacquered across her body brushed high-riding breasts against my arm. It wasn't accidental. Barbara Channing. Some party, huh? She had green eyes and a voice of smooth Scotch. Zuger was her husband. No more grindhouse circuits for them, she said. This film is down-home entertainment for the masses, and it has the backing of the provincial government. But they still cut corners, filming with old stock, World War II seconds from the National Film Board. That stuff is highly flammable, you know, but it keeps production costs low. Across the room was their benefactor, a short fellow with tight curly hair, bushy eyebrows, and a walking stick with figures, a man and a woman inside a glass hexagonal handle. He was part of the church hierarchy under Duplessis in the 1950s, gave $70K to jumpstart our project. Said what we're doing is culturally significant for French Canada. Their last grindhouse film was Quasmo, about a hunchback in a diaper looking to get laid. She shuddered good-naturedly at the ignominy. The Duplessis fella, also in a limited costume budget, scratched stick figures across the chests and hips of 2 girls. One had high cheekbones and appeared to be from the islands. The other had raven black hair and a cluster of moles along her back. Seems he's got his own immersion program. going on right now. That cracked her up. Henri Ducas, she said. I had heard that Barbara and her husband were Splitsville. Don't believe everything you hear. I nodded. Her husband grew up above a service station. He lived for the mix of octane fumes and the tastes of breakfast, scrambled eggs, and toast. Today, their film studio is a combination lab where they edit the daily rushes and an Irving gas station. His own immersion program. She laughed again. I wondered if she were putting me on. 2. Lucille was in the second room upstairs, wedged in a couch corner, hands and legs bound by hockey tape. Falling lines of mascara scraped her face and her powder blue hair pointed like scorched grass. She hadn't been drinking, taking drugs, nothing. Her voice was helium spiked. Cut the tape. Now. Reggie shrugged absently and smiled a squirrely grin. Too much pink candy, he said. Out of control. Some just can't handle the oysters, I guess. Oysters. Again with the oysters. He may have scored 33 goals last year, but he was pissing me off, and I decked him. He bounced on his elbows. I deserve that. I deserve that, he said. We had a cup to win, and for Christ's sakes, he was partying, taking drugs, and his girlfriend's fingers had turned a pulpy purple from a loss of circulation. Barbara, finding scissors from somewhere or other, crossed to Lucy with short stabs from her spiked heels. Lucy rubbed at sore wrists. She was only in a bra and panties and go-go boots. I draped my leather jacket over her shoulders. Outside, the sky was black disc and Lucy's gray eyes, crescent moons. She was quietly laughing. Let's take Reggie's car. That'll really piss him off. A set of car keys jangled. Where could she have been hiding them? We can drive in style, she said. The car was a gold Lamborghini 1966. How Reggie could afford such a thing was beyond me. I was making $8,000 a year, him $12,500 with bonuses. Grain silo number 2, a large slab of concrete columns glowed like phosphorus as we made our way to the street. I'm not sure about this. Reggie's such an asshole, Lucy muttered. I'm not a sex machine, she said. Our thighs bumped against the car. Come on, superstar. The harbor pinched at my nostrils. Seagulls splashed at the waves. I don't know why. Maybe I was pissed at Reggie for asking this favor. Maybe it was the upturned nose and freckles that danced in Lucy's eyes like my girlfriend Stana's. I don't know. But we climbed in. A truck with thick tires and side mirrors the size of toboggans drove past and then pulled in front of Reggie's crate. The flatbed was crowded with corrugated drain pipes, underground tubing. Mayor Drapeau was transforming old Montreal into an upscale makeover for Expo 67. The truck's engine coughed to a stop, and then the driver hopped out, hands in pockets. He wore leathers with a World War I aviator's cap, thick goggles, and a python-like scarf topping off his Knights of the Air ensemble. His colors were Northern Arrows, MC, an agitprop fist clutching a quiver of crushed arrows. He quickly became sharp lines that slowly limned and then vanished under dim lights. Someone slipped me something, Lucy repeated. The guy with the walking stick, she said. He's the drug dealer, Ducas. He messed with me before. The truck in front coughed to life. There had been 2 people in it, not one. White light, reverse gear. I yanked Lucy below the dash. The car's front end buckled and crumpled, glass and metal bashing, popping. I shouldered open the driver's side door, pulling Lucy across the seats to the street. Plumbing poles shattered the windshield, shearing away the Lamborghini's roof. The second driver hopped out of the passenger door, ran through the fountain and beyond Nelson's column to open ground. I gave chase before my lungs exploded and I bent at the waist. When I returned, the truck and its poles were wedged to the wreckage. Lucy was gone. She left a note on the remains of the car's window. Henri Ducas used and abused me. I called the gendarmes from a phone booth across the way. He had messed with me before. Drug dealer. By the time they arrived, the party had busted up. Hell, you wouldn't even know there had been a goddamn party. The smell of pot was replaced with the electricity of Lysol. And nothing was there. No women with finger-painted handprints on their chests, no naked men with their partial erections, and no ersatz jazz. But somewhere, I was pretty damn sure, Reggie was still searching for his damn car keys. 3. Lucy was still missing. No one had seen her since last night, and Stana was pissed. She had been interviewing Lucy for an expose to appear in the Montreal Gazette and had grown attached to the kid. Anger and frustration darkened her pale blue eyes. How could you have left her? I pushed back from the breakfast table, propped an ankle on top of a knee, and absently played with my runny eggs. Practice was scheduled for 3. Stanley Cup Game 5 was tomorrow, and now I was investigating a kidnapping. And I had fucked up, leaving the girl alone. Stan aside, flipping red hair behind her shoulder. When Lucy was a kid, she was taken from her mom and placed in Rochefort Asylum, Duplessis era, 1952-53. Lots of illegitimate kids were falsely placed in mental institutions, government-sanctioned orphanages to cloister away the fact that they existed. It was a Catholic-led conspiracy to promote the nuclear family, Stana said, shaking her head. She was a wayward Catholic herself and had no problem talking so openly. I'm Jewish, so together we had a lot covered. She lit a parliament and exhaled violently. Anyway, at 14, Lucy escaped. At 18, she winds up an extra in Fire Wagon. And now she's a stand-in for Simone, the shot reverse shot sequences. Shot reverse shot? Lucille's hair was blue. How can she be a stand-in? The coloring would wreak havoc with a light meter. I don't know. Stana took a quick drag, blew smoke into the corner ceiling of my St. Urban's flat. She said she was pissed at the director, something to do with the sins of the past. Stana's fingertips tented. Dukas was the one-time director at Rochefort, and according to Lucille, performed strange experiments on the kids, even farmed some of them out, sex slaves to rich parishioners. She flicked away a tobacco lash from her tongue, took another drag. Some priests even took advantage, nuns too. I handed her a ribbon note I had found. Something here's not kosher. Look at the writing. The words were in a smooth scrawl, even spaces between letters. The words are too neat. Where's the urgency? Where's the fear? Stana slowly nodded. What are you suggesting? I don't know, but I'm not sure that Lucy wrote this note. She tapped her lower lip. The story she was going to tell the Gazette would have blown the lid off the Catholic Church, Stana shrugged. I think Dukas has her. Drug dealer. Messed with me. Time to talk to Dukas, I said. Henri Dukas now worked in a glass-walled building near the campus of McGill. He was the Minister of Culture or some damn thing since 1963, about the time Lucy escaped from the asylum. His office was paneled with a walnut desk the size of a Buick. On the walls were photographs of young girls, 11 to 14, the Duplessis kids, an underprivileged group from rural Quebec that the government had sponsored and helped place in expensive private schools. He was proud to have been a part of such a program. Yeah, and what about the other program? Trafficking young kids to priests and nuns. And Miss Younger, please be careful with what you say, or I may press charges of slander. I have tapes, conversations with Lucy Drolet, the ramblings of in which she details deprivation experiments, electric shock therapy, and being traded about for sexual favors, bishops, cardinals. There is no truth. There are no witnesses. My witness is gone. Dukas tapped the edge of the blotter with square, bulky fingers. He pointed to the wall of coffee cream file cabinets to his left. In the case files, if you read them, you'll find she frequently heard voices, schizophrenia. This note you handed me, used and abused, a delusion, a frame job. She also called you a drug dealer, I said. Lies. And what about the girls last night at the party? They looked 16, 15, farmed out from Rochefort. What party? His thin smile whitened the corners of his lips. You were there. Witnesses, he laughed. I was never there. Another delusion. I have a high-ranking MP that can tell you I was with him. Those girls were Channing's girls, interns, editing, Foley work, and her husband assures me they are of age. He struggled from behind his desk and limped to the cabinets. His left leg from a war wound was shorter than his right. The glass handle and limped to the cabinets. His left leg from a war wound was shorter than his right. The glass handle to his walking stick had shadowy figures inside, one hovering, it appeared over another. The cabinet squalled metallically. Dukas thumbed through a series of composition books. Ah, here we are. He tossed them across the desk. Clipped to one of the books was a 4x5 photograph of Lucy at 12, eyes full of sad knowledge that the world was full of hurt. Her sandy hair was in a page-boy cut that made her look sexually ambiguous. Stana and I flipped pages. Dukas' fingers tapped at the blotter's edge. Those are Lucy's journals around the time of the break. The images surreal, the thoughts incoherent. Observe the handwriting. We did. The letters appeared to be scribbled by a broken hand, lines leaning left. By contrast, the lines to the lettering in the note were upright, straight. Moreover, there were no bubbles in the tails of the D's to used and abused, just straight, skinny downstrokes. Lucy did not write this note, he said. She's a lefty. Stana remembered Lucy popping cap bottles off Cokes at the edge of our kitchen's countertop with a left hand. I'm being set up, Dukas said. Like I said, a frame job. 4. I pushed back my pork pie as elevator doors hushed open. The evening papers briefly mentioned a Lamborghini incident, but there was no mention of a warehouse party and powdered drugs. Simone Barral, the film's female lead, was quoted as saying, "Quel dommage, such a car, très jolie." The article also went on to talk about her work in 2 Godard films, citing her filmography, and one columnist even listed her measurements. Simone, now in a tight-fitting terry cloth robe, let us in. A cup of tea was in her left hand, the air burnt toast and lilacs. "Sorry to run off last night and leave you holding the bag, mon ami," she smiled, little canine teeth She had a thin nose and brown eyes that resembled coffee grounds. I don't ever remember seeing her at the party. On the breakfast table, a wooden basket was crowded with bruised fruit, a dark discarded wig pushed up against it. There was also half a glass of orange juice, red lipstick stain along the mouth. Simone's lipstick was mostly beige. Where's Reggie? Stana wondered if he may have been the intended target of the Lamborghini incident. And this was allegedly his pad. An appointment, Simone said. She had no idea with whom. I glanced at my watch and mumbled, "You're wearing Chanel number 5. We? It was one of the few perfumes I knew, but I smell lilacs, 2 fragrances. I pointed at the cup of orange juice, 2 colors of lipstick. You can tell Barbara to come out of the back bedroom. She wore a matching terry cloth robe. Her hair was tousled up in a towel. She slid an ashtray to Stana. You're very observant. Why the wig? I rubbed at the edges of my mouth. Guess. She grabbed Simone around the waist and kissed her cheek. I don't want the reporters knowing of my peculiar institution, she said, a faux Southern belle. She found that a real crack up for some reason. Peculiar institution, sir, she repeated, lighting 2 cigarettes and handing her girlfriend one. Is your husband dangerous? Stana exhaled quickly. We all have our dark sides. Barbara shrugged and turned to Simone. The 2 women nodded in unison. The goddamn devilment girls. What about the girls at the party? Your interns. That's what Ducad said. Channing's. Mordecai's interns. He has a thing for young girls. She held up a hand. I mean, barely legal girls. Legal, but barely. Okay, there had been an incident in the past involving a 16-year-old, but never mind about that. That was long ago, and Mordecai settled out of court, Barbara assured us. What about this? Stana reached deep into her purse, the one that's the size of a milk crate with the rings of Saturn for a handle, and floated a ribbon of paper between the terry cloth girls. This just isn't true. You're saying Lucy wrote this? A heavy crease formed between Barbara's eyes. I played with the brim of my pork pie. You know Lucy's a chronic liar, right? Visions, voices. She didn't write this. Barbara squeezed Simone's hand. My husband did. Barbara's index finger, the nail lacquered with black polish, traced the sharp vertical lines of the D's. Drolet's tails had bubbles, she said. These don't. She remembered Drolet's handwriting from the contract she had signed. Now my husband writes like this, always in an angry rush, never able to take it slow. She gave Simone a knowing wink. He hurries his fills, if you know what I mean. She laughed. Simone joined in. So if Mordecai Zuger wrote the note, why was he implicating Henri Ducas? Stana thought the same thing. Lucy had mentioned something about your husband and the sins of the past. Sins of the past? Barbara tapped her lower lip and glanced over at Simone. Lucy, after she escaped from Rochefort, and well, you know, she worked for us. Well, she was the girl, the one Mordecai had slept with, underage, but barely. Barely no, but Simone said, still wrong, yes. We were talking at the coffee shop across from the forum after the game, a 5-1 win. Well, I should say Mordecai Zuger was lecturing and I was taking notes. How could I possibly think that he would kidnap Lucy? Yes, they had a thing a year or so ago. She was 16, 17 a year or so ago, asshole. So was Donna Michelle when she appeared in Playboy, tough guy. Playmate of the Year. Nick Ray, director of Rebel Without a Cause, great film, was banging Natalie Wood, and she was like 16, maybe 15. So what's your beef? He lit an angry cigarette, his hawk nose tucked in as if ready to receive a punch, daring me to take a poke. His dark hair was a threadbare placemat, a bad comb over. I was fond of that girl, but Barbara was fonder. She had a thing for her? A thing, yes, but nothing happened. Lucy wore blue hair to the last shoot before she went missing. She said something to Stana about the sins of the past. That's more about my wife than about me. Talk to her. I did. She said it was more about you. She would. He leaned toward me. Look, who you going to believe, huh? What's your worry? I rubbed at the edges of my mouth. Ducas, drug dealer? He's a businessman. That doesn't exactly answer things. We all had a falling out, he said. Leave it at that. He took a quick drag. She's a chronic liar. Barbara or Lucy? Take your pick, pal. Jumped in Java, the coffee shop sure lived up to its name. Framed hard bop albums littered the walls. Sonny Clark, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Art Blakey, and the Jazz Messengers. On each Formica table were lamps with quarter notes cut in the metal shades. I smiled my lopsided grin. He picked up 3 paper napkins from the placeholder on the table and clicked his pen open. Asked me to write something, tough guy, anything. I mumbled something about the Jazz Messengers, and he wrote, Art Blakey's one bad drummer. He wrote that hurriedly 20 times and shoved the napkins toward me. A surly curve waved through his lower lip. Does that look anything like my used and abused missive? It didn't. The handwriting was tiny, crushed down words with broken backs. So it wasn't Lucy who wrote it. It wasn't Zuger. Could it be Channing? Ducas? She accuses me of writing a note that she knows I couldn't possibly have written. Bitch. I was trying to figure out all the alliances of this case, who was with who. She's a dangerous woman, he warned. Are we done here? We were. He sulked off. I slowly slurped a second cup of coffee. 5. The next morning, Dukas buzzed my St. Urban's pad. He knew I had a plane to catch to Detroit, so he said to keep things brief. Those stories Zuger and the girl Lucy are spinning, Lucy may have told stories, but the note wasn't written by Zuger. Then who? I think Channing. There was a long pause. Really? That makes sense, he mumbled, his mind working quickly. It all makes a lot of sense. You see, Fuller, Lucy did tell the police things before she disappeared. She spilled to the cop shop about my past and Project LL. Project LL? Street name LL. Long lasting, he said. Cardinals, church hierarchy, the rich, they're my clients. Mr. Bourdieu was my, how shall I put it, bridge to privilege. Everyone loves hockey. He pushed the product in gated communities for men with problems. 1,000 oysters, an aphrodisiac. More than that, he said, this makes you 17 again, and a hangover afterward, he laughed. Right now, the drug's illegal, cooked up by some chemical engineers in France. I have a connection with them through my cultural ministry office. You didn't hear that from me, of course. Dukas figured if Channing's involved, then Reggie was playing both sides, a double agent, working for them and him. So who took the girl? Them, one of them, Channing, Zuger, Bourdieu. Another pause. Or maybe she just took a powder to get us all in trouble. The police have been asking questions, a lot of questions. It'll take some coins to quiet them, but I got the coins. I said nothing. I'll deal with Reggie, he promised. One final long, awkward silence followed, after you all win the Stanley Cup, of course. 45 minutes later, I was at Zuger's, the basement of a small house behind the service station. We were huddled around a Steenbeck machine, watching the raw footage for Fire Wagon. The room had cinder block walls, a heavy smell of rubber cement, and a white corkboard along a far wall loaded with film equipment from reels to splicers. Several strips of film dangled from a shelf behind him, and along the corkboard were different outtakes with little notes and numbers pushed pinned to by each coil. Ribbons of film were everywhere, resembling slick pieces of bent flypaper. The basement matched the size of the ranch house, about 950 square feet. One section, just over 280 square feet, was a bulky box with a door. Its outer walls were paneled. He noticed me noticing. That's my darkroom. That's where we developed the dailies. You want a tour? Nah, I held up a hand. I run a shoestring efficient operation. Not aided and abetted by Project Long Lasting? I told you, I have no idea about that. No, really now? There was pink powder at your party. Reggie talked about 1,000 oysters. Lucy told me she wasn't a sex machine. People were taking Long Lasting at your party. You said something about uppers at your party. Reggie brought it in, he said. I'm not distributing it. Reggie, not Dukas. Your wife? She distributing? Zuger shrugged. He was in hipster casual, white slacks, black turtleneck, chains around his neck, a stained glass medallion rested near the porch of his barrel for his stomach. Some cat, his hair all askew and unwieldy, held out his arms, genuflecting. Could have been Moses carrying the 10 Commandments or John the Baptist after notching all those locusts. My money was on the locust. The fellow genuflecting looked a little green. I can't account for what my wife does. She lives her life, but Reggie brought the drugs for one-time recreational use. And who brought the girls? I told you already. They were interns. The camera placement for the Fire Wagon hockey footage was incredible. At the blue line, the center, and behind the two goals, the pace was fast, the movement fluid, the colors vibrant. Let me warn you, pal. You're messing in Dukas' business, and he'll mess with you, I said. When Lucy was taken, the people I saw around us were Northern arrows. I saw the colors. You were a Northern Arrow. Stana had done her research. It's good to love a gal with reporter friends. Emphasis on were, he admitted, to being lost after the war, forming the outfit in 1949, but he quit in 1955. Never looked back, he smiled, right after James Dean died. Seriously, the dream of the open road died when he did. He played with the edges of the medallion, and that's when I realized the guy under stained glass was Dean from Giant. He rewound the film. The girls at the party were Barbara's groupies, he said. I may have slept with Lucy, but she and Barbara were lovers for months. He flashed a thin, dirty smile. You know what I think? I leaned forward, hands on my thighs. That's not what you said before when I asked. Every time the goddamn story changes, you're all playing me. You and your wife are partners, and you're pointing fingers at each other to distract me. I pushed back my pork pie. You're both in a fight with Dukas for his drug empire. That's good. He pointed a finger. That's good. And then shook a triumphant fist. You should storyboard that. Make a hell of a movie. He handed me a 10 spot. Put me down for a contribution. Okay, I think I'll stop there because we got waylaid by the interruption, and I got like, it'll take me another 10 minutes to finish, and we're already at a half hour. So we're right in the clubhouse turn. Everything's going to come together, but I think this is a good stopping point.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks, Grant. Do we have some questions or comments for Grant? Well, I guess I'll throw it out, Grant. One of the things I enjoy about your writing in particular is the dialogue. It seems so real and yet animated in many ways. And I know you're obviously, involved in theater and as an actor, and now currently directing a play. So I guess I want to ask you how you feel the two parts of your creative life kind of, enhance each other in terms of your acting experience and then the writing of dialogue and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's so many ways. I don't want to, go on and on here, but like acting is about being present and being in the moment and really listening to your scene partner, or feeling what the audience is giving you if you're doing a monologue and you're, responding to that. And I feel writing is the same thing. I just feel when I'm writing, I'm trying to listen to the characters in the story, and that they'll tell me what to write. They speak. They speak from their own skins and from their own place, and things just happen. I have no idea what's going to happen when I start a scene. I might have scaffolding for a plot, but that, like, I know who killed the main person or whatever. I know who kidnapped. No, that's not true. In this story, it changed. So, it just scene by scene, moment by moment, being present and listening and following impulses. That's what actors do. And that's what I try to do as a writer. So for me, I have a method style of writing, I call it. In terms of dialogue, I'm, as an actor learning lines for play, the way I learn lines is I don't look at the last word. Everyone says, you look at the cue line. Well, the cue is not always the last word of the line. There's a reason to speak, and sometimes it's in the middle of the other actor's line. So I circle those when I'm studying a script. And so you got to have these, what I call trigger words. I know trigger means a different thing now, but there's a reason to speak. So I try to link those into the dialogue so people are responding to what's being said or what has just been said. And so that's another technique I took from theater. And then so I guess that's the two main techniques. And the other thing I take from theater is in scene work. I think something's got to happen in a scene. You got to close off something and you got to open something else up, and there should be some kind of turn in every scene. Like something surprises you and something surprises the detective. So it's almost like there's like a mini deflection in every scene, or else you can just summarize it. Why bother having it, And especially when characters are talking, when most people tell stories about themselves, they're always the victim or the good guy. They're never the asshole. No one tells a story about themselves being an asshole, and so in a lot of the scenes when I write, I think about characters have stuff to hide, and so they're not always telling the truth. And I think you could see just from a lot of the scene work here, there's just a lot of line going on, and the detective's got to sift through that to figure it out.
Anyone else out there have any questions you'd like to pose?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks for reading. Yeah, I'm a fan of Hayden Fuller, and I'm just wondering, is he ever gonna get out of Canada and have an adventure in Brazil or Evansdale, Iowa, or something?
I am, because I got another series with Eddie Sands, who's like a cab driver badass, and it's the same year. It's set in upstate New York, that series, and those are just short stories right now. But I've been thinking about having a hookup kind of hookup. That means something different today. Having like Eddie, and kind of like Ed McBain had a novel where he puts Corella and Hope, Matthew Hope, I think is the character's name, a lawyer, and Corella, the cop from the 87th precinct, together. And I love McBain's stuff. So I was just thinking I'd like to do a Sands Fuller story, like have some reason for Fuller to be in upstate New York and meet up with Eddie and go on it, some kind of mission together. I don't know what, but I'm kicking around a novel idea for Eddie. So maybe it'll work the other way where Eddie's got to go up into Canada and into Toronto. This story is set in Montreal, in case you didn't notice that, but most of the Fuller stuff's set in Toronto. I actually went to Montreal a couple of years ago with my wife for a vacation and did a lot of touring for sites it was great. We stayed in old Montreal, and I just love that city. It's a great city. But yeah, so Adam, yes, I'm hoping to get Eddie Hayden in a different location at some point, somewhere in the US.
Anyone else?
Hey, Grant, thanks so much. Robert here. How you doing?
Hey, RTB.
Yeah. Hey, I was just thinking about, how interesting to ask you as an artist and a writer here, the allegiance to that hard-boiled tradition in cinema and literature. And then it's a period piece too. So somebody like you're working with this genre that was established. And then, of course, somebody that reads it today brings all the baggage we have of a modern sensibility or whatever we bring to it. But I'm asking you as kind of the artist where, even with that allegiance to the genre and the style and the language and the period piece, where you felt that sort of new things and water under the bridge has inflected, just some of the conspiracy theory stuff, the drugs, that kind of stuff, where you maybe inflected things a little bit differently than if you had written this thing 25 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And like the whole Duplessis thing, I just came across that. I was doing some research on abuse, and it was a real thing. And first thing, I see Gary Clift over here, and we went on a trip to Winnipeg together, he and his wife and me and my wife, and it was a fantastic trip. But we went to this museum up there, and human rights kind of emphasis to the museum. And there was a lot of stuff about First Nations people and the injustices that had happened to them in Canada. And as a kid growing up in Canada, we didn't get those stories, right? So this is what, Robert, it's a really good question, because I was taught that Louis Riel was a traitor to the crown. He's a bad guy. But when I was up in Winnipeg, there's a statue to him, and now he's seen as like the leader of this resistance, and he's a hero. He's taken on the white power structure. And I kind of got into, I bought a book at the museum called A Knock at the Door, and it's about what happened to First Nation people, single moms in the 60s and 50s, where there'd be a knock at the door and the police would come and take your kids away and put them with a white family, or put them into, residential schools so they could learn, Christian values and all that stuff. Now, I'm sure that, somebody writing in 1965 wouldn't necessarily be thinking about those things, but I'm aware of that. And so when I got back home from that trip with Gary and Cheryl, I rewrote Neon Kiss. Originally, the Reynolds gal was a white girl, and after that trip and reading that book, I changed her to a Métis, which was what Louis Riel was, which is part Native and part French, and just opened things up. So yeah, I'm very much aware of, a writer writing today in a kind of a woke time, and then at the same time writing in a tradition from the 60s. But I think American crime always has dealt with issues. I mean, I think it's kind of like, what people say about Rod Serling, how he could deal with issues of race, all kinds of stuff on Twilight Zone, because it was a science fiction speculative kind of thing, and people maybe didn't look at it closely, so he could get stuff by the sponsors. I think crime has always been, crime has dealt with abuse, sexual abuse. I'm not the first writer to have a lead character that's a survivor of abuse. And so, and incest, there's all kinds of stuff, in Jim Thompson's novels. It's all over the place. So it's not like I'm, inventing anything new. It's just, I am coming at it with a 21st century sensibility. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, trying not to sound too far at the time. I have to like be consistent with the time period I'm in. So there's like words that were used back then that I have to use because they aren't used. So I use the word Indian, for example, because that's what we called people of color. We didn't say First Nations people. So when Hayden's dealing with that constituency in 1965, Indian is the term I use. I know that's not politically correct in some circles, but it's set in 65, and I got to be consistent with that. But I bring a 21st sensibility to it. If that makes sense, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's
Yeah.
that's great stuff. Last little thing, red pill, blue pill. Is that also a little Matrix shout out or something?
Yeah, yes, sir. There's all kinds of shout outs in here. Fire Wagon Hockey, the name of the movie, was actually a book by Brian McFarlane that I read when I was a young kid, all about the Montreal Canadiens. Even though I'm a Leafs fan, I read that book because I want to know about hockey history, So that's kind of a little shout out too. There's all kinds of little shout outs hidden in there. And Hayden Fuller is a combination of Sam Fuller, who's like one of my top 5 favorite directors, and then Sterling Hayden, the actor. So that's where I got that name from. And there's all kinds of little things like that, in there. So anyway, my little Easter eggs, I guess.
Hey, how long had you been thinking about Hayden Fuller as a character before you started writing about him?
Oh, a long time. But there was all these different incarnations. One time he was like this kung fu guy that I stole from Marvel Comics when I was in high school. His name was Rick Dragon. And then I went into kind of a Jane Austen period where I learned about free and direct discourse. And so I had a character called Austin Evans. I could never settle on a name, but the idea of sort of, someone was asking me, if I could have any actor play in any time period, who would it be? Some of Brooks' practicum students were asking me that. And I went with Vic Morrow from the old TV show Combat, and Montgomery Clift, if I could combine those two, because I like the woundedness and the vulnerability of Montgomery Clift and the sensitivity, and I like kind of the Eastern European, almost Russian kind of look that Vic Morrow had with those heavy lines right here and that broader face. And, he looks like a bad guy, but is a good guy on Combat. So, So that's the image I have in my head as I'm writing these pieces. But yeah, I've been thinking about this character for a long time. Sorry, I'm nervously playing with a watch here, so you probably heard some weird sound effects and shit. My bad.
No problem. Anyone else have any questions for Grant?
This is Mark Dickinson here, and I was.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, how you doing? And I was curious. I have students in my class who love genre, and sometimes it's like the Marvel superhero stuff, and other times I do have a lot of noir fans actually in my class, and we have conversations about how, I guess it's piggybacking on the last question, is thinking about you have to honor the tropes, and yet you also come from like a literary tradition of character, and I guess genre, when it's at its best, it's called tropes, and when it's at its worst, it's called cliches, and you avoid them. So, but I'm curious about what you bring, how you tie those two worlds together, and how you kind of honor the tradition while still like keeping it character driven and artistic.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something well, you couldn't see it when I was reading aloud, but I do a lot of free and direct discourse, and I take a lot from narrative telling, like writers I really admire, like Bernard Malamud and Philip Roth, and Jane Austen, and so there's a lot of places where what I was reading is summarized dialogue, not direct quote dialogue, and it's a technique I use. I've had editors want to clean that up, and so like this story I got coming out in Groovy Gumshoes, that happened to me. All my free and direct discourse got made into direct quotes, but I like it because it creates more uncertainty, because it's a summary. It's not really what was said. It's not, so it creates more mystery. And to me, that's like a literary technique, and I use it a lot. And some people get it and some editors don't. That's okay. And I really wanted to be in Groovy Gumshoes. So I said, okay, and let the editor, I didn't die on that hill, but so that's one thing. And I think the other thing is I really like rhythm. I played drums for a long time. I'm now playing guitar, but I played guitar like a drummer. And so to me, I hear the music in my head, and I can't really explain it, but like when I first started reading detective fiction, I read Dash Hammett because my mom was into Pimento, the Lillian Hellman thing. And so she was always talking about Dash Hammett. So I started reading him, and I love the Continental Op stuff. And he was fat, and he's like 240 pounds. And, it's like, this is cool. He's not like a good looking guy. And so like I read Red Harvest, which is still one of my favorite crime noir books. And then all the op stories, and then Dane Curse and all that. And, but it's when I read Chandler, like even as a 17-year-old, I was like, and I don't think I had a real nuance for language when I first started writing, but I knew something about the way Chandler wrote. It was like Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby. I mean, there was just a poetry, romanticism to it. Actually, I see a lot of Fitzgerald in Chandler. I think he was a big fan, actually. I've read his letters, and he mentions Fitzgerald. And if you look at Moose Malloy, there's a kind of Gatsby-esque story there about wanting to get back with a kind of Daisy Buchanan. Take a look at Farewell, My Lovely. Even the title has a Fitzgerald, and he makes fun of Hemingway in that book. Where characters are talking. So he wasn't a big fan of Hemingway. But anyway, my point is, when I read Chandler, I knew this is the way I want to write. There's just something here that's magical. And it's not like I'm bagging on Hammett. I think he's a great artist, but Chandler was real special to me. And then just in the last 5-6 years, I discovered Thompson. And that was like a mind fuck. I'm like, oh my God, this guy is way off the rail. This is so cool. So, and then Splain I liked too. I remember being in college and telling a professor, Eddie Warren at Kansas State, how much I like Splain. He's that guy's a fascist, so it's like, I think, but there's so much energy. There's this rawness. So I think like from Splain, I want that energy. From Thompson, I want the weird. From Chandler, I want the language, the poetry, the rhythm. And then Hammett, kind of the hard as nails moments, like the title, 5 Hard Bites. It's a very Hammett kind of title, So yeah, so I learned from all those guys, and then I use it, but then try to do things, my own way, I guess. So it's not just derivative. So it's in the tradition. But yeah, you're right. Like, how do you want to honor so for me, it's like retro and new at the same time. I want to have one foot in the past, but I want to be doing some new stuff. So like, and I don't want to go on and on about this. I already going on and on with this answer, but it's, the very first story in the collection, the female character was a femme fatale. And then I wanted to address that and flip it. So if you read the rest of the collection, it changes. She's no longer a femme fatale. So that's one of my ways of rewriting a past trope. So I set up the trope, and then novels 2, 3, and the novella and the final story, she changes. And he actually ends up marrying her. That's Stana, who's the reporter. And that's a shout out. My dad's name was Stan. I know that's weird. What the hell's with this guy? But yeah, so anyway, so it's a great question, Mark. Thanks.
That's it. I never thought about Chandler and Fitzgerald being similar, and they are, though. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I love Fitzgerald. I love both those writers so much.
Hi, Annette. Did you have something you want to ask?
Yeah, actually, I have a suggestion, which I've already made to Grant in the past, but after hearing this reading, I'm going to say it again, and maybe since he's got some peers in the room, he'll do it. The Southwest Popular Culture Conference in Albuquerque is such a absolutely perfect fit for a reading like this. They have a crime fiction section. You would have people trailing around trying to buy your books. Your editor is here. You could the editor could set up a table there. It's a huge conference, and a lot of writers are there, and they really love crime fiction. So that's just another sell. I'm on the planning committee. So is one of our new librarians over at the Rod Library. So she could talk to you about it. But I just think you could sell a lot of books. You could get a different audience, and you would enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
Plus, I'll be there. And so will Mitch.
And do they have tours for like Better Call Saul country?
They have Better Call Saul tours. It's wonderful. It's in February in New Mexico. I mean, you couldn't ask for something better. And we have extended the deadline for proposals until the middle of November. And I am your contact. Again, we have somebody over in the library. And you'd enjoy yourself so much.
Ed, what do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. We will
You
look
would
in-
sell books.
Yeah, that's the main thing, right?
Is that what we're supposed to be doing? I wasn't really sure what our main objective was, but
Well, I just think it's a great venue for crime fiction. They love crime fiction there. I mean, that's where they shot Breaking Bad. I mean, these guys are absolute maniacs there. And this would just fit really well. I'll shut up, but thank you. Very nice reading.
Thanks, Annette.
yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
Could we ask a question?
Yeah.
So I know that you're really into theater and film. So I was wondering how that sort of structure, like sort of the 3-act kind of structure, might influence how you go about creating these stories, like from the very basic beginnings, how you might structure a narrative.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I basically, in my novels, steal from Sid Field. He has a very simple book on writing a screenplay, and he basically says it's a 3-act structure. When I was studying with Ben Nyberg at Kansas State, he said, like modernist short stories, not all of them, but several, Chekhov, Hemingway, Catherine Mansfield, Carson McCullers, Steinbeck, that you set up your exposition in Act 1, and you create a destabilizing condition, and then in Act 2 of the story, that's where we have the crisis point, and we have a deflection. The character goes spinning off, makes a choice, or something happens, and then there's a resolution. And I think for novels, I stole basically Sid Field. Basically, okay, so in The Big Heat, which I started my conversation with, The Big Heat, Act 1, Banyan's not real committed. He's like, leave me alone. I'm like spending time with my wife. Why are you calling me at home? He doesn't really listen to people that are asking questions. Boom, his wife gets murdered. That's the end of Act 1. That's the first deflection. Suddenly now the detective is no longer just trying to solve a crime. He's trying to get revenge. So it spins him in a different, and he's lost all faith in humanity and is a man on an island. And then he ends up against a brick wall. He can't do anything. Bertha Duncan's got this letter and nothing will happen unless she dies. And he wants to kill her, but he's a cop and he can't do it. But he tells Debbie, and then Debbie goes and kills Bertha. Boom, that's Act 2. That's the second deflection. And then all hell breaks loose. And Banyan is, returns to humanity, goes back to the police. And Hitchcock, it's in so many films. And so I kind of, when I write a crime novel, I know I'm going to have 2 major turning points somewhere. I don't know what they are. I just have that scaffolding in my head. So I know at some point there'll be some turn, some twist, and then there'll be another turn or twist, and then a conclusion. So yeah, that's definitely, and I stole it from Sid Field, and it's not my own idea. And it's a great book on how to write screenplays. And then I started seeing it in novels too. Well, especially think about all those romance novels, right? You got a boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl, or girl meet, it's basically a 3-act structure, 2 spinning points. There's usually some kind of confusion, and then something else happens. All those Hallmark movies have it going on. And the books too. I've read several. I like romance novels. That's a little secret. Are we still recording? Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, yeah. So that's what I got from film that I've sort of made part of my DNA, I guess, my writing DNA.
Okay, well, we're knocking on the door at 5 o'clock here in the Central Time Zone. So I really appreciate everyone tuning in, and thank you, Grant, so much for the reading. And
Thank you, Ted, for hosting and for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate it.
well, thank you for teaching me a little better how to use Zoom. So now I know some new stuff, some new tricks. No, God, thank you, everyone, and be safe out there, and we will talk to you later.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Grant.
Grant.
Thanks, Grant. Had a good time.
Hey,
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Good to see everybody. Great to see you, Mark.